Okay, I have 10:01. We'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Jairo McMeekin. I am currently the Dean of College Access Services at Central Carolina Community College, as well as the Director of Equity and Pathways for the North Carolina Student Success Center. I have the pleasure of serving under Dolores Ali, our Executive Director. And we really are glad that you are here with us this morning for our first of many sessions and professional development opportunities by the Student Success Center. And so this is the first one for our summer. So I have the pleasure of introducing, before I introduce Dr. Gonzalez, Dolores, did you want to say anything? I'm sorry, I didn't see you before.
Yeah, that's fine, Jairo. This is awesome. I would say on a Friday Eve, this is awesome to have as many of you who are here with us today to learn about this valuable resource. So Dr. Gonzalez, I'm looking forward to hearing what you're going to share with us here among the 58 campuses and on behalf of the Success Center. And as Jairo said, this is our first one for this summer. So you're the kickoff point for us, and I appreciate you being here today.
Yes. So thank you for that, Dolores. So yes, I'm gonna go ahead and Dr. Lori Gonzalez said she would like to introduce herself. So I'm gonna just hand it over to her. At the very end, I will put a link in for a post assessment. We would really appreciate if y'all can fill that out so we can get that feedback and figure out, how we can improve. And then from there, I will help Dr. Gonzalez with the chat. Feel free, any questions, feel free to use the chat. She wants this to be as engaging as possible as well. So I'm gonna turn it over to her and let her take it from there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here with you all. I have really enjoyed getting more familiar with the offerings of the Student Success Center. So I took a look at everything that you have already done this spring and in previous sessions, and what a wealth of information. So I'm just glad to be one little part of this great masterwork that you all are putting together. Thank you so much for hosting me today. I also just want to do a quick shout out to Juana Hernandez and Juanes Ramirez from CFNC, who are also part of what connected me up with the North Carolina Community College system and the Success Center today. So my name is Laura Gonzalez. My pronouns are she and her, and I am an associate professor of higher education at UNC Greensboro. I'm also the mother of 3, and I am a 4th or 5th generation Scot-Irish German American. So sometimes people who look like me don't think of ourselves as having immigrant roots, but I think it's important to note that even though my folks came several generations ago, that I do have that connection to this country and to other countries. My last name is Gonzalez because I had the good luck to marry a Gonzalez. My husband is originally from Panama and just recently became a naturalized US citizen. So my interest in education and immigrant populations is both personal and professional. And I really love having the chance to speak with folks working at community colleges, because that was actually a piece of my dissertation way back when. My question was about why students from Latinx backgrounds of the college-going students, a higher percentage went to community college than to four-year colleges. So I was just very interested to understand that choice. And so that from college choice to college access to understanding how best to support students to move over barriers and into higher education opportunities for those who want that option. So this, the work that I'm going to share with you today is part of kind of my passion and also comes out of my research. So I just really appreciate the chance to share space with you and talk a little bit more about this. So I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. So given that I myself am not the child of an immigrant, I wanted to start by sharing with you some stories from people who I've talked to in North Carolina who do have that background. I feel like it's really important for us to kind of start with their voices. And this was part of a research project that I did to try to understand how students who are living in mixed status immigrant families, so mixed status can include maybe perhaps one family member who does not have permanent legal status in this country. It could include family members who have DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is a temporary status. It could include people who are US born citizens. It could include people who are in the midst of adjusting their status or who have a temporary protected status. So living in a mixed status family is a sort of a complicated experience wherein some folks have, due to citizenship, more access to education or work or social services, and other people in the family have less access. So I wanted to talk to some young adults in North Carolina who might be able to tell me more about what is it like to be in a mixed status family and be trying to move forward in your education. Kind of what is the impact of that? So I'm going to start just by sharing a little bit with you from somebody who chose the pseudonym Jay. Jay was not this young adult's name. But what he shared is that he does have DACA and that he was able to get an associate's degree. And so the community college was for him a starting place, like it is for many folks in his position. But eventually then he encountered the difficulty between being charged in-state versus out-of-state tuition. Now I do know, speaking as someone who works in the UNC system, that this is a problem more so on our end than on the community college end. Community colleges have been, from my end, from my perspective, more equitable and have promoted greater access in helping some students be able to pay in-state tuition to attend community college. But I think the thing I really want to emphasize to you here is that Jay described trying to move forward in his education as like finding himself in a maze. And in his words, you take one way thinking that that's the way out, and you follow that until you can no longer get through anymore. And then you have to go through backwards, take another route, and then you advance a little bit more, but then there's another roadblock. You know what I mean? I guess I picture a maze where you never know when it's going to be the end, and you're not going to be able to do anything for yourself anymore. So I feel like this quote was really impactful and meaningful to me as a way to think about and understand both the initiative that folks like Jay take in really trying to continue to push their way forward and take more steps in their education and moving towards their desired career outcomes, but also the fact that the way forward is not clear, it's not without blocks and barriers, it's not straightforward, and can indeed be very confusing. I also just really appreciate this last paragraph where Jay mentioned that because he was able to go to school, now he's able to contribute more to the economy, to buy a vehicle, to get a house, and that he knows a lot of young folks similar to him who just want to go to school, but with the out-of-state tuition problem have a really hard time affording that. And so then he ends with this plea, if they can only allow us to go to school, I mean, we don't really ask for much, just let us go to school. We'll pay for it. I've paid for my school. Education changes everything. A career changes everything. So I hope part of my hope in collecting these research narratives was both to understand from the people most affected kind of what are the barriers in their way, but also to have an opportunity to share these stories with people who might be in a position to make a difference or might have a leadership role, and to help them, maybe have a shift in empathy for what it's like to be walking in these shoes, or perhaps to counter some incorrect stereotypes that might exist. I think especially students with DACA or who may be undocumented, there are a lot of stereotypes and there's a lot of incorrect information that circulates about them. So let me just share with you one other narrative, and that comes from Alex. Okay. So Alex was part of a family that did a status adjustment, but a status adjustment sort of places you in this legal limbo. And so he said, having a limited status while in school is really difficult. It can be not only place barriers in front of students, but be discouraging. Realizing they can't use FAFSA to apply for financial aid, that they may not be eligible for in-state tuition. And so he both recognized the objective burden that this created for himself and his family, but also the way that it affected his motivation or his hopefulness, that it put doubts in his mind, wondering if he could continue along his desired path. And Alex reflects on the fact that he was a salutatorian in his high school, had a high GPA, was doing all the extracurricular activities. So many of the things that we would hope for and look for and applaud in our emerging adults or adolescent youth. But he, even though those things gave him opportunities to get accepted into schools, the financial barriers were still very significant. I really do want to highlight here the role of school counselors, because this was important to me in terms of moving forward and creating the So Much Potential website that I'm going to share with you in a few minutes. So Alex mentioned that his school counselor did try to help him, but had not ever been trained to do so. He never expected to encounter a student that had limited to no status, and he didn't know what to do. And so Alex had to turn to friends and networks that he had created with advocacy groups in the community, and in that way was able to get resources and information and find scholarships and enter a private university. And so again, to sum up with this last paragraph, Alex notes, we have dreams of accomplishing big things and being professionals in the future, but it's really hard when the system is fighting against you. It's putting all these limitations on you, and you have to be really, really lucky to find a good support group, or else you feel very discouraged. And I've had a lot of friends, I've known a lot of people that just give up. They feel there is no point to continue, and they have so much potential. So clearly that was part of what inspired me to create this website. And So Much Potential was my way of trying to bolster the ability of educators to work more effectively with students like Jay, like Alex, and like many, many others. And so given that each of them were able to, through tenacity and determination, find their way forward, but that they also encountered many barriers and sometimes felt like it was just luck that they encountered the right person at the right time who could answer their questions with accurate information. But in other ways, many parts of the system were not bolstering their educational journey, or were not providing them hope, encouragement, and accurate information. So this website is the primary audience is educators, and I use educators to mean like school counselors at the high school level, academic advisors in community colleges or in four-year colleges, faculty members, administrators running student success programs. Back before I was a faculty member, I was an academic advisor and sort of career guidance person for first-year undeclared students at NC State University. And so I think all of us have a part to play in helping students to move ahead in this pathway towards higher education, wherever it is that they start or however far it is that they would like to go. And so when I read these narratives, or when I talk to students who may be in a mixed status family, what I think they're asking from us, from the community of educators, those of us who are logged on here today and our colleagues who may not be, I think of three things. One, I think they're asking us to really see them as human and to encourage them. So not to buy into some of the misinformation or stereotypes, as I mentioned previously, and not to, if we have limited time, to sort of sift through our list of students and say, I'm not sure these kids are really going to college, so let me focus over here on these other students. I think these students are calling to us to be advocates and allies, and to help them maintain their hope and find the tools that they're looking for. I think the second thing that these students need from us as educators is to give them accurate information. And that's not easy because they have some complicated life circumstances sometimes. And so the kinds of solutions or tools or information that might work for us with some other student groups that we encounter may not work with students in mixed status families. And so that's kind of I think a challenge to us to think about, how do we make sure that we do have accurate information? And if we don't, then how do we find that accurate information? And then the third thing that I think these students are asking from us is just guidance in helping them demystify and decode the educational environments. I know all of us who work in education are aware that we use a lot of lingo, we have a lot of acronyms, and sometimes it's not fully transparent. So if we think about students, for example, from immigrant families, if we think of them as similar to other first-generation college students that we might encounter, it maybe helps us remember to break things down a little bit more. Even immigrant students whose parents went to college in their home country are still perhaps less familiar with all the different educational systems in this country. So just remembering that sometimes we need to help people even understand, like, what's the difference between a 2-year college or a 4-year college, or at a community college, what's the difference between an associate's degree or a certificate, or all these other ways that people can move forward with their education. So given, and again, those are just the 3 things that I think students are asking for, and you all may have experience working with students from immigrant families or mixed status families, and you feel like they're also looking for other things from you. I think then, in order for us to provide those things to students, we need to remember to listen. I know that sounds really basic, but I think listening with humility, so listening and understanding, I'm not sure this is a question I've heard before, and I'm not 100% sure that my answers are going to be adequate for this situation. So listening with humility and empathy, and knowing where our limits are and when we need to involve other folks in our network or pull in a new set of resources. Being motivated to do the work, to kind of stay up to date, to keep checking ourselves, to keep reaching out for new resources. And then just networking and making connections with people who do have the information that would perhaps benefit us. So once again, I just want to do a shout out to CFNC, and most particularly to the Spanish language services, to Juana and Juanes. They are key members of this network for me. And so when we think about all across the state, all the different types of situations that we find ourselves in, we will have access to different networks, right? And so part of what I hope that we'll do today is think about how can we make connections with, for example, people who are cultural brokers in various immigrant communities. And I'm going to refer, I think, more often to Latinx immigrants because of my spouse and because those are the students that I have worked with the most. But I also just really want to say that I know that immigration is a global phenomenon, and that immigrants come from all places to the US. And so I am not intending to exclude other populations. I'm just trying to address the population that I have the most experience with. So for example, living in Greensboro, I might be aware of the kinds of resources that are available in the Triad. Or having worked and done my PhD at NC State, I might be aware of some of the networks and resources that are available in the Triangle. I've done some research to know what's happening in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. But when I think about all the counties in our state and the spaces, especially where community colleges are, to intentionally provide access across all of these, our rural communities from coast to coast, I know that in some of those small towns, it might be harder to think about, okay, where do I start finding people who can help me improve my ability to get accurate information and understand fully the needs of the immigrant community. So we'll kind of talk about that throughout, but I'll just give you one example, which is I was doing a program that was grant funded and therefore needed to happen within the Forsyth County area. And so I knew fewer people in Forsyth County, but my starting point was I just did a quick scan of which churches in Forsyth County were offering Spanish language masses or services. And so then I started by just reaching out to those pastors and ministers and just, introduced myself and asked them, to explain to me a little bit more what kinds of needs they heard about in their congregations or parishes. And then to tell me more about who they tend to refer those folks to. So ministers often are doing more than just religious connection. They also often are helping people with basic needs like food and shelter. They're helping people with legal issues or with educational issues or occupational issues. And so that was a good starting point for me to kind of meet some of the religious leaders in Forsyth County. And then they helped me also expand out to people in social services. So like Catholic Charities, or people who are doing great work in educational spaces. So no matter if you're in which county you're in North Carolina, I really encourage you just to spend a little bit of time thinking about who might be available to you. And I will give you, in this quick tour that we're going to do of the So Much Potential website, I will share with you some ways that you could start kind of mining some of those resources and connections. Let me just pause for a second and see if there's anything in the chat. Okay, yes, thank you, Heidi, for mentioning the business sponsorship. Absolutely. I think that some of these kinds of opportunities are well known by some of you and may not be known by others. And so I really appreciate you mentioning that and trying to make sure that we all have accurate and appropriate information. Okay. So I'm going to actually kind of take us on a tour through the website, and I'm going to illogically go from right to left because I wanted to really start with regional resources. So for example, let's say we were interested in knowing what's going on in Eastern North Carolina. These are just some of the resources that I was aware of, or the folks, the kind of community advocates who I interviewed as I was building this website, the things that they knew about. If you are in Eastern North Carolina and you have other resources you'd like to suggest to me, I am so excited to receive those and more than happy to add them to the website. So for example, the North Carolina Society of Hispanic Professionals, which is based in the Triangle, has all kinds of wonderful programs to know about. Hopefully you already are aware of some of these. Hispanic Educational Summit, they have scholarship funds. They have a college fair, which also includes bilingual materials for family members, the Graduate program to encourage high school students to complete their high school diplomas. They have a ton of financial information, which I know we'll get to financial aid in a second. Oops, that's not what I wanted. That's their financial information. Okay. Yeah, so programs and financial aid, we'll get to those in a second. Let me get back to my screen here. Oops, I'm so sorry. Okay. So you'll also see that some of these are university-based resources. Some of these are community-based resources. Some are things like Spanish language media. That's another great place to find connections or see who in your region is active. So this is just kind of a quick example of ways that you can start to build up your understanding of what are the immigrant relevant resources, immigrant relevant educational resources in your area. We can also just take a quick look at Western North Carolina. I also have some statewide resources here. So thankfully, because we live in the digital age, even if I lived in a small county in Western North Carolina, there are still things like CFNC, Spanish language services, that I can access, online and throughout the state. Adelante NC is another great advocacy resource that is statewide. And if you don't know about them, I'd really encourage you to connect with them. Let me go ahead and show you this College y Consejos. This is coming out of Latinx Ed, which is in Chapel Hill. They've done some really innovative things lately. So they have virtual coaches that can help students, regardless of kind of what community that they're living in, to kind of think about their pathway forward. And they also have a great scholarship list that they update often that indicates, yes, these scholarship funds are open to undocumented folks, sometimes exclusively for undocumented folks, maybe just DACA, but must be able to complete the FAFSA form, websites, requirements. So this is a great resource. There's the business sponsorship that was mentioned by Heidi in the chat. So if you wanted to read more about that. We also have some national resources. So again, this is some of these, like the Dream Resource Center. So this is in California, but I think it's important for places like North Carolina that we are newer to having immigrant populations join our existing populations, but places like Texas, Florida, California, New York, that have a longer history of immigration, sometimes are a few steps ahead of us in terms of having had more time to develop programs and structures and support services. So sometimes looking to places like California to sort of see, all right, how are they doing this? What kinds of resources are they providing? Can just give us ideas, especially for those of you who might be administrators or be charged with structuring programs on your campuses. Some of these sources, I think, also certainly can be shared directly with students. So My Undocumented Life is kind of a grassroots effort that often includes the voices of undocumented students themselves and helps them to kind of not feel quite so isolated, connect with others, kind of give each other some of that informal advice that we, again, saw from, I think, Alex's narrative that I shared with you. And then they also have sections specifically for educators and counselors to help us, again, improve our ability to work effectively with students who might not have a permanent legal status. There's other places like the National Immigration Law Center that I tend to trust because I know there's a lot of inaccurate and kind of messy information out there about immigration status. And I'm certainly not an attorney. I don't know if any of you are, but I think it's important to have these trusted sources that we know we can go to for accurate information, and because legal issues continue to evolve. So DACA, for example, had been started under the Obama administration, came under heavy fire in the subsequent administration, and then has been, there have been efforts to sort of try to bolster DACA more currently. So knowing where to go to sort of get a sense of, okay, what's the deal? What's the story with DACA right now? Like, are they accepting new applications? Can people still apply? So this is one of my kind of trusted resources for that. Let me just say too that in terms of DACA, yes, people can still apply. And in fact, as of April 2022, DACA renewals may now be filed electronically, which was not the case before. And so the National Immigration Law Center is, again, a place that you can also help connect students to really help them understand, am I eligible? What are the steps I need to take? When should I consider doing this? How long does it take to be processed? So finally, let me also just mention the video resources that are available here. And again, many of these are really leaning on the expertise and the great work that CFNC has been doing for a long time. And so some of these, as you see, are in Spanish. So like financial fundamentals. And again, your students in mixed status immigrant families are likely to be bilingual or English speaking, but if they want to be able to involve their families in educational decision-making, which I think is a reasonable thing to do, then Spanish language resources can help us be inclusive of the families as well. Some community college specific videos about career training, thinking about the ways that students with various immigration statuses might be able to find kind of access and aid, specifically at community colleges, residency determination status, which is a big deal for students, even if they've lived here for most of their lives. If students don't have a permanent legal status, then RDS is kind of a tricky thing. Okay, videos in English and Spanish. So again, I show this to you, and not to say that this is the exhaustive and definitive resource, but just to kind of show you that with a little bit of creative digging, you can find resources that you can use to inform yourself, to inform your colleagues, and to share directly with students to make sure that you are responding accurately. Let me just pause for a second and see if there's any questions here.
Donna Gonzalez, this is Jairo, and I just have a question. So I love all these resources, and I love like how they're also organized, because then you can find it specific to your area and the students you're trying to help. I do have a question. I don't know if you're going to get to this, but I just want to ask, as far as resources in talking to folks, because you mentioned earlier the misinformation. Do you have any resources on how to talk to folks to combat some of that misinformation?
Yeah, let's go there.
Okay.
So
okay.
This is just the sort of accurate terminology, because I think, sometimes it can be, again, for those of us who don't have legal backgrounds, this is a lot of different terms, like what's the difference between a refugee and asylum seeker, or somebody who has temporary protective status, or somebody who's undocumented or temporarily documented through DACA, or a permanent legal resident. So this is a way to kind of start to sort out some of the terminology, at least. So a permanent legal resident is somebody who has a green card. But again, a green card is something that you have to renew. So it is gives you some rights, but is not the same as citizenship. The other thing that I'd like to emphasize here is some misperceptions that sometimes people have. And sadly, as somebody who has background in counselor education and has talked to a lot of school counselors, sometimes school counselors hear these things and repeat them. And again, I'm not trying to bash school counselors. I think they do a tremendous amount of work. But it's, again, on us to make sure that we have accurate information and that we're not sharing inaccurate information. So sometimes I have heard students say, well, my school counselor told me, or I have heard that I can't go to college at all because I don't have a social security number. So that's not true. And so this might be an important place for us to help students think about, if you don't have a social security number, your pathway is maybe not as broad. You don't have perhaps as much terrain or as many options as somebody who does have a social security number, but it's not true to say that there's no pathway at all. So I think some of these misperceptions are things, again, that you all might have heard in the course of your work, from students, from family members, from colleagues. And so these things are important to really clarify. So you can't get financial aid if you don't have a social security number. Again, that's only, there's the partial truth, the grain of truth in there is that FAFSA and federal student aid sources do depend on social security numbers, but private aid sources do not.
Yes, thank you for this. This is exactly what I was asking about. So
Okay.
this bullseye for you is just on the money. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So since we're looking at some of these kind of common misperceptions, let me go also to some of the frequently asked questions. And so again, I think depending on what type of educator you are, if you're an instructor, if you're kind of student services, if you're an administrator, you may or may not know who the next student is who's going to walk into your office and what questions they're about to ask you. And so sometimes we don't have that much time to prepare ourselves, right? To like do research and to understand all the complications or difficulties that students in mixed status families might face. And so I made the FAQ section just to try to help with, for example, if a student comes in and says, I'm at the community college, I'm applying to a four-year college, but my parents are worried about putting any of their information on the application or the financial aid or any other forms, residency forms, what should I do? And so these FAQs may help you try to alleviate some of these fears and get some accurate information. And wherever possible, I did also try to include the sources so that if you want further information, you can kind of go back up the chain. Do DACA students complete the RDS? Yes, they do. But again, it is complicated. And so CFNC has some wonderful resources that are kind of like top 10 things that you should know if you are starting the RDS process, and especially if you might be have DACA or be in a mixed status family. Many of these FAQs are about financial aid admissions. So again, going backwards, I'm going to go over to this financial aid section. So I think having a list of scholarships that are open for students who have DACA or are undocumented is kind of one of the primary questions that many of us receive. So this is just sort of a starting place to give people the understanding that yes, it will take some time and some effort and some energy to kind of chase all of this down, but there are possibilities. So for example, the Hispanic Scholarship Fund keeps a resource list for people who may have DACA or be undocumented. More locally, the YWCA and the Latino Family Center there have some more kind of regional North Carolina resources. Down here, I included some links to Adelante, which I mentioned before, the North Carolina Society of Hispanic Professionals, which we looked at. Let's just pull up one of those. So like general scholarships and grants, undocumented in particular scholarships and grants, some scholarship search engines, things specific to business school, law school, medical school, STEM related scholarships, student athletes, graduate level. HACU again is the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. So we can skim through these scholarships, internships, other types of student opportunities. So I'm gonna have to close some of these tabs. MALDEF, which is the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. My Undocumented Life we had looked at briefly. The National Immigration Law Center also includes some resources on financial aid and some student advocacy groups. So once again, I think the main purpose of my just kind of skimming through this really quick is to combat the misinformation that there is no financial aid if you don't have a social security number, and also to help you be able to give tools to students. So this is work, of course, that it's appropriate for students to do, but sometimes, again, thinking about them in that kind of first generation college student lens, we might need to just help them understand the difference, for example, between a scholarship or a grant or a loan, or help them understand that some scholarships you have to reapply for every year so that they don't like get partway into their educational program and then not understand they have to continue this search for scholarships if they want to continue moving forward with their education. So helping them to see all the steps in the process.
And Dr. Gonzalez, you do have a question from Heidi in the chat.
Okay. Do you address issues of challenges with licensure certification? I do not. That is such a great point. So there are some careers that are at this point kind of barred to folks who don't have a social security number because going through the licensure process, you have to demonstrate citizenship. Heidi, I think I have heard about you as well in my list of networks of amazing people who have great information. And so I don't know if there's anything that you would like to share with us in that regard. That's definitely a perplexing and continuing problem. You're welcome to unmute if there's anything else that you know about that. Okay, I will just keep moving on. Oh, oh okay. Okay, thanks. So Heidi said, not her mic isn't working, but it's a big challenge. And now each college has to do the licensure certification process. Ugh. Yeah, talk about moving through a maze.
Yeah, and I would even add, I hate to add to a challenge, but I think it's not only just curriculum courses either, like our continuing education and things of that nature, like mapping that out as much as possible for our different student populations, and just really having it available. And that's part of like this guided pathways work, right? It's creating the paths and everything for those before students even apply. And so to make sure that we as colleges hold ourselves accountable to have those things available as much. And it takes a lot of work, and I don't think it should fall on just one person. I think everybody should be involved in this lift. And so I think that's just an opportunity for all of us to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I remember I fully acknowledge how complicated it is and that the landscape continues to evolve. And so a pathway we might set up one day that is accurate and open might then shift and change. And that is definitely part of the continuing challenge for us as educators. And just think about how much more frustrating and confusing that could be for the students themselves. So again, like pulling that image of the maze back up. I will say that I was working on these issues before the Obama administration proposed DACA. And I remember sitting with school counselors with kind of tears running down their faces that they were so frustrated that they felt like there was nothing that they could offer to their students to give them hope. And then like the next week, DACA was announced and really shifted the landscape. And so I know it's hard to continue to help to encourage and motivate and inspire young folks when we can't truly tell them what doors will be open and closed in the future. But I guess I would rather help students give them some tools and help them figure out what progress can I make today, knowing that tomorrow maybe a different door will be open. So it's hard. It's hard. Okay. The other parts that are here on this financial aid page include just some information about eligibility for financial aid, some things that we can use to help us, even work with and educate students about various types of aid that are available, merit-based aid, need-based aid, and then also a big section about FAFSA, because for many students, that is, of course, one of the primary ways that they become eligible for federal and or state aid. And so for students in mixed status families, the FAFSA is just confusing. And so this section kind of helps you answer some of those basic questions about, does parent citizenship status affect eligibility if the child is a citizen or has DACA? How do you answer certain questions on the FAFSA about citizenship or legal residence? How do we submit tax information? And again, a lot of this, I think, is CFNC also has some great videos that help you kind of prepare for and think about how to work with students on FAFSA. While I'm down here at the bottom of the page, let me just also take a second to click on this insider tips and strategies. So part of the benefit of increasing your network to include, for example, the Spanish-speaking pastors or the community advocates, is that they have become like masters at finding the side door, the back door, the open window, and have all these kind of insider tips to share. So for example, some, the North Carolina Promise program, which is a wonderful opportunity in that it holds tuition at a relatively low level, even if you're being charged the out-of-state rate. Things people may not have thought of, like if my family has Mexican citizenship, the Mexican consulate can help students think about taking online classes with Mexican universities. So that might be another way for students to think about just continuing to kind of stay involved with education, moving towards educational credentials, thinking about agreements between the community college system and the UNC system, thinking about summer programs like UNCG has a camp called Chance. Juntos is a very comprehensive program out of NC State. So ways to, again, help your students get some exposure to being on college campuses, get around a group of peers that might also then become meaningful possibility models to them, helping students kind of demystify the college process. There are some great programs available to high school students like Crosby Scholars in Forsyth County. Advocacy organizations we've talked about a bit, the benefits of how the community college system, I think, has more equitable policies than the UNC system, college access workshops. So these insider tips might also kind of add to your store of resourcefulness. So again, a mention of that business sponsorship option that was mentioned in the chat, ways to help students think about earning college credits before they get to community college or four-year college, through dual enrollment, early and middle colleges, AP courses. Okay. Well, let's talk for a second about admission. So given that sometimes if we know that we have a role that includes admission and some of you may not, we might use the summer, for example, to prepare ourselves to work more effectively with students from mixed status families. So maybe some of you who are administrators or leaders on your campus might suggest some of these CFNC webinars to some of your colleagues in admissions, that if they have time for professional development over the summer, this could help them kind of become more, get a leg up and become more prepared to answer questions. If, for example, you have a student call you and say, like, can I come by this afternoon? I have some questions about admissions. And so you have a little bit of lead time. There might be some information that's useful to you from the College Board, again, from My Undocumented Life, The Informed Immigrant, and most definitely from CFNC. Or again, if you have a student right in front of you and you didn't know they were coming, then I would say try the FAQs and see if some of their questions might be answered there. Let me just then let you all know that you might have more questions. I may not be able to answer them. CFNC is, again, a wonderful resource. And so I just wanted to let you know about their college planning hotline. Here are the ways to get in touch with both Juana and Juanes if you wish. Here are ways that you can submit information to me. So either questions, suggestions about the website, additional regional resources that you know about and you'd like me to add. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me this way. So let me then, oh, great. There's some more things in the chat. Dr. Ramirez, I'm not sure if you are logged on or in a place where you would like to unmute and say any of these things that you added in the chat.
Sure. Buenos dias. Buenos dias. Delighted to be here, and thank you guys for showing up and doing this sort of work. So I just put in the chat some questions that have been very helpful that Ms. White helped us to pull together to think about maybe an internal audit of our programs and kind of asking certain questions. So I went ahead and put it in the chat. Questions relate to, is it a social security number required? does this program lead to a licensure, or what type of requirements do we need? And then also thinking about funding opportunities. So certain programs have their own sort of funding available for all students. Some of them are very specific. So I just went ahead and just put those questions that have been helpful.
Thank you so much. So at this point, I'm open to kind of hearing more questions. I'm also happy if it would be helpful to any of you to see if we could even do some breakout rooms. And so, for example, if some of you who have like administrative roles would like a chance to sort of go into a breakout room and share information or strategies, we could do something like that. So I'm really open to anything else that I can do to share information or connect you all to each other so that you can have sort of continuing learning communities and communities of support around this topic. So I will just be quiet for a second since I've done a lot of talking.
So Dr. Gonzalez, and just in my experience in helping with these, a lot of times breakout rooms do help just because some folks may not want to speak with 56 people on the line, but if we can get them into some groups and just have some discussions and, maybe 1 or 2 questions you would like them to just think about or answer, we can send that to everybody and then, maybe come back and share out if they're, feel like it. I think sometimes that really, really helps with sessions like this because you provided so much robust information just to get to thinking like, what are next steps? Some schools are further along than others when addressing these issues and concerns. Some people work for colleges that they're not allowed to say, immigration or DACA or anything like that. Some other folks have a lot of support in that area. And then there's a lot of people that are in betweens in some way or another. So maybe we do like just get people to talk maybe amongst themselves and then have a volunteer to share out if you're okay with that.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay, all right. So what we'll do, let's send folks to rooms and we'll give you about 15 minutes just to talk. And so maybe everybody quickly introduce yourself. Let's talk about where you're at, where you think you would like to go. What are some things that may be working for you? And if you've tried some things that didn't work, maybe share those things as well, because maybe that helps other people, not take the same missteps or, run into the same obstacles. And so let's do that. And then we'll come back and have everyone, if you can maybe select a volunteer that doesn't mind speaking for the group just about what they heard. They don't have to mention names. They don't have to say, oh, I was in a group with Dr. Gonzalez and she said this. You don't have to just say my group discussed this. Okay, we can go from there. So we'll do that. Send you into some small groups and then we'll come back. Let's see here. How many we got?
I better stop sharing. I think that'll help.
Okay. No, we're good. Let's do 10 lines. And let's see here. Option. Oh, let me do this. There we go. And if you're having any trouble, you can either unmute yourself or use the chat to let us know if you have any trouble getting into a room and we'll get you there.
So are we assigned to groups or we just select a group?
No, you were assigned to a group. We just threw you in random groups just to talk, meet some other folks, things of that nature.
I can't find my name.
Oh, wait a minute though.
What
You
group
know
am I
why? Nope. Let me tell you. I think I didn't assign the co-host and I got you assigned as a co-host. So I can send you to a room. You want to do that?
Sure.
Okay, I got you.
Thank you.
Okay. these other folks on the call. Let's see here. Heidi, did you want to go to a room?
Yeah, I'm on a different computer now, so now I have a mic. So yes.
Okay. So okay, let me see. Let's do room 7. Okay. And then Ramirez, McKinney, or Byington. Do you have trouble getting to a room or? Okay. And Laura C. I don't know who that is. Okay. Let me just. Hey Lou, did you have trouble in your room?
I was the only one in there, so I gave it.
Oh, okay. Let me assign you to another one then, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, let's. Wait, where are you? Okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Oh, record. Okay, so everybody should be back. Oh, they're coming in now. Okay, all right, there we go. And thank y'all for sticking around. Appreciate having you all. And again, thank y'all for just, hopefully you had some engaging conversations to really talk about this topic. And so does anybody, and you know, maybe if we could maybe have 2 or 3 groups share out just maybe something that they learned, something they may, you know, try, something that they were trying that didn't work well that they could share with the rest of the group. Do we have any volunteers? And you just feel free to unmute yourself and we can just go from there. Oh, the Dr. Carl Bryan raised his hand. So we'll let him go first. So the Dr. Carl Bryan, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Jairo. That is really funny. Thank you for that subtle recognition on things. But I wanted to address the group and that the 2 people I connected with, and I apologize. Want to thank you so much because you've filled up some sticky notepads and everything for me. But I wanted to share with the group that I have a really high-flying student, and I have the benefit to work with Jairo at Central Carolina Community College, and just trying to figure out if when we get DACA students in and they have a skill set that is so great and so forth, our endeavors need to be, I don't want to have the quote unquote conversation that says it's not worth it to get a college degree because you don't have this particular social security number or piece of paperwork or something like that. Given the fact that our population in our area is, as I shared in the breakout group, is a third. I mean, really, Lee County is a perfect landing spot and so forth. We've got to get things easier, and I don't know where that starts. I guess that's my plea to this group is how can the mechanisms, what state has the perfect template or the perfect model or something like that, and where does this work continue to kind of break down some barriers, add steps, detract from steps, whatever. And so I would love to be a part of that conversation for the future, just for the mere fact of I'm into breaking down paradigms, and I've confronted a lot in this particular process and still can't figure out how to get this child employed when she is being sought after by a lot of different particular companies. So if anyone, I'll put my email address out there just as a plea for help. If anyone has any particular ideas, start here, start there, start that, just to kind of skinny down the research part of, because this SoMuchPotential.org, Dr. Gonzalez was phenomenal. I mean, looking at that, I didn't even know that was there. So I'll dig, but if anybody has the magic key, just, that's my plea, I guess you could say, because I want to get this child employed, which will subsequently bootstrap a lot of other kids and get them employed as well.
And if I may add, so when we were talking, and Dr. Bryan, correct me if I understood incorrectly, but I think we were referring to undocumented students where they don't have social security numbers.
That's correct.
and so with DACA students, just clarifying, they do have work authorization and they do have a social security number. So our biggest concern is how, like Dr. Brown was mentioning, for our undocumented students, what employment opportunities are out there once they do go to school. So just wanted to make that clarification
Yeah,
there.
thank you so much. See, I'm so wet behind the ears and rookie on this whole particular topic that I'm not even using the acronyms correct and so forth. So that's why I would say, can somebody help me so I can help others? That's my biggest plea.
So Carl, I don't have a magic answer for you. I wish I did. But I think that's one of the hardest things is there's no way for us to promise employability when there's no legal work authorization. However, as we know, in North Carolina and in the United States, there are many, many people working without work authorization. So there are potentially ways there. It's just hard as a college to be able to promise any of that because you're promising someone will employ you without documents. And so I think it's hard to advise on that, but I think reaching out to a network, trying to find employers, doing employment where you're an independent contractor is often where people will talk about. I went to a really great session talking about nursing, and again, nursing, some of it's state by state, and how they were encouraging people if they could to even do nursing, because maybe you could work, as an independent contractor. There's all kinds of work that you might do that's not seen as like in the hospital working as a nurse. So I think it's a really hard question to answer. And if anybody else has, other things to say, feel free. I do think there's potential out there, but of course it's going to be more difficult for the student, to find an employer that will employ them without, especially now with all the, electronic W-9 stuff, that's making it, I think, even more difficult. Smaller employers, employers with really high demand, I guess that, are having to find workarounds for that. But yeah, I mean, I think we all have those students that, they are just such amazing students and people and have so much potential, just like the name of the website. But it's hard to really advise on that since, we couldn't hire them unless, you're doing it, I guess, maybe through an independent contract, which most community colleges don't do a lot of. I don't know if that's helpful, but
that is tough as a college advisor because you're not a dream killer. You're trying to be an inspirer.
Exactly.
And so forth. And then when you see someone that has so much potential, it's like having a Porsche sitting in your garage.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, I used to tell this story all the time of people like working with the mixed status family, and you have the siblings, and one's a citizen and one's a permanent resident and one's undocumented, and talking to them about all their goals and how that conversation is actually different with each student, and what benefits they can get, and then the undocumented students being the one who wants to be the doctor, and then you're like, have you considered medical assisting? Because as far as I know, like, that's sort of the only one that I know of you can do right now. Maybe things change, maybe, but and you feel that deflation of their goals because they want to be a pediatric oncologist, and have the drive and everything, but it's just not going to work out, at least right now. I mean, that's the only thing I think we can say is, at least right now, let's take some steps, with what you can do. We've been trying to work a lot more with Con Ed, especially with the cost issue, and there's some Con Ed programs that maybe that's not your end goal job, but that's a great starting point. And some of the things that I think a lot of people don't even know what they are, biotech and things that, everyone sort of grows up and knows what a nurse is, but they don't really understand, all this other things that I can't even talk to you about because I don't understand them. But, there are some programs that have lots of potential, especially you start somewhere and then, maybe you move up and get all kinds of other training, and, I don't know. Let me let other people talk.
And I just want to add one last thing in regards to this topic. And in some cases, and I've worked with a few students where they get their credentials here, but then they may return to their country to become those nurses, become those doctors. And so, but we want our students here, right? We want those doctors here. So we want those nurses here. But we have seen that as an option where they go back to their countries to practice their education or to have a career in what they studied here. But that's not, for me, I feel like that's not the goal. The goal is to keep them here.
I wanted to mention that in our group, and we told Dr. Robledo, so I'm going to let him speak in a moment, but we talked about some issues of access, even for people who are documented. We talked about students with certain visa status, that the community college is not a possibility for them. And so whenever we're thinking about the community college as the open door for all students, that is not true. There are some eligibility requirements that you have to meet, thinking about international students and how not all community college are able to certify them can also be a challenge. And it is because of the funding, right? So we talk a lot about starting with the challenges, and I'm gonna let Dr. Robledo, he put it so nicely. So Dr. Robledo, sorry, put you in the spot, but I think you have something really important to say, and I think this conversation is very timely for that.
Hey everyone, Dr. Ramirez waited until 5 seconds before our breakout room was closing, and then he volunteered me to speak. So I just wanted to say one of the best practices that we shared that's helping students are some of the dual enrollment programs that while they are in high school, whether that's Career and College Promise, early colleges, apprenticeship programs, for most of those, I'm not as familiar with apprenticeship programs, but for the others, legal status does not matter. And so working with students and families to maximize their accessing those programs before they graduate high school will then minimize the cost aspects when they graduate from high school. And then just to piggyback on what Dr. Ramirez mentioned was my observation as being in the community college system for 12 years now is the gap in accessing information and resources for adult learners once they leave high school. The community college philosophy is that we'll take everyone, and we pride ourselves on our geographic accessibility to all North Carolinians. When you look very closely at the enrollment processes and or accessing financial resources that they need to actually enroll and to graduate from our institutions, there's often a disconnect, and that's very unfortunate.
Well, thank y'all for jumping in there and sharing, and really, really appreciate, those of you who were able, courageous enough to jump in there. And then, also for the processes. I know some of you need to process some of this information and, go and just reflect on and, do some self-analysis on the things that you heard today and the things that were shared. And so really appreciate y'all going into the rooms to really have these conversations. Glad to hear that people were sitting there looking at each other's screen. So just really, really thankful for that. I would love to turn it back over to Dr. Gonzalez as we wind down with any final thoughts or anything she would like to share. And from there, then we can, go from there.
Sure. I think the only thing I would share is just that this is a free resource that's out there. And if you can think of one or two people who you think would benefit from also having access to it, it's just my deepest wish that you share it. That's all I want, is for this to get into the hands of people who can use it. So I was telling Jairo that I'm not good at social media or any of those things. And so if any of you are, and you are willing to share it, with networks or with individuals, I would just be truly grateful. And I appreciate all of the work that you all are doing. I know that it's education's a hard place to be in right now, that there's great amounts of need and sometimes fewer and fewer resources every day. So I just appreciate you all for continuing to do this work along with me.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. And so, and again, I'll be remiss if, again, Juanes and y'all are just amazing for even recommending Dr. Gonzalez. And so just love the, the support that you have given to the Student Success Center and being able to get that information out. And so just things that are just going to help us overall, right? And, there's pieces of this that, the commitment to this student population, but then also how do we, use some of this information to benefit, other populations of students as well. And I think there's a common thread that goes through all of them. And so this is just another set of resources that we can use to really help all of our students. So really, really, really appreciate y'all for even recommending Dr. Gonzalez and, speaking for her. And so, I value their input. So they were like, hey, we got this person, you got to let her, in here. And so we're like, yes. And so they did not let us down with what you brought in, Dr. Gonzalez. So appreciate you for that. 2 reminders I wanted is I put the link for the post assessment. If you could please fill that out. Takes 3 to 5 minutes to fill out. We would really, really love any information you can share in there with us, what you liked, what we need to replicate, things of that nature. And then also put a second link in there if you can connect with us on LinkedIn. We have a bevy of resources available. And so we'd love to just connect with you. If you use LinkedIn, it's there for us. And so, and then sometimes, just cross collaboration can happen when other people are in that same space. And so again, if you could please fill out the post assessment, please connect with us on LinkedIn if you use LinkedIn. If you don't, I highly recommend you start using it. It's one of the few social media outlets that I actually use. And so I really enjoy the interaction and things I'm able to learn in there. So yeah, please look at that. And then, feel free to visit our website as well. But we look forward to seeing you at our next couple of presentations over the summer. And so hopefully there's some other topics in there that you're passionate about or interested in that you can come and learn with us. And so really appreciate y'all being here today. Thank y'all. And we'll leave it open for a couple more minutes. If you have any burning questions you may want to ask. If not, feel free to log off. And again, thank y'all for being here.